Hi everyone, my name is Victor and I wanted to go over a process I used to solve a Power BI problem I was having. If you search, slice by measure on YouTube, you'll find some great content on there. Where I lifted most of my process came from this video here, which is Power BI filter by measure and a slicer by from this outfit called BI Elite. I believe the gentleman's name is Parker, and um, also, there's other people like, Patrick here from Guyana Cube also uses Parker's kind of method as a springboard for his own implementation of that. And this lady from Cobal also has a different way of using, uh, it's a different implementation, which it's not quite like this. It's not like Parker's, but it's also a pretty interesting way of, solving this problem. The only thing I did not see was, how to slice by dynamic measure, and that's where um, the issue I was having, right? That's my problem. And so through some tinkering, I found out how to do it. But again, I'm not an expert in Power BI. I'm not an DAX expert. I'm hoping that somebody can look at this process and say, okay, hey, we can improve on this, and maybe just fix some probably glaring issues I'm not able to see. But um, like I said, I'm not an expert. I know I use calculate function way too much. So, uh, but before we go through this, I wanted to make sure that you watch the video from BI Lead from Parker. This first video, Power BI filter by measure, because that's where I'm gonna start from that process as with the understanding that you've watched it and you've already reached that point, and then we'll go from there. So Parker's video shows us how to do this, which is, you get this measure in here and you can slice and you see some values starting to disappear, right? Because they've been taken away. And it also shows how to dynamically set these two figures, the lower bound and the upper bound, and, wire it to other filters. So if you change, regions, you see those two change. If you change date ranges, that changes as well. But again, his solution was all for a single measure, and I had to do this for, actually in my case, it was 4. Right now I'm just showing 3. The data I have here is just strictly for illustration purposes, and what it is, real quick, is um, I have, our business has operations in all the states, and they got some transactions and some revenue and units as part of that transaction. And then what's been identified is some that have come through some marketing or ad campaigns, and we want to see, okay, out of those, for the transactions in Minnesota, that value is 5.48 for the whole date range. And if I go to January, that number is 5.32 for Minnesota, but 5.48 for the whole, country, and you can see these changes. So my data set does not have as much variance as my actual business case did, but it demonstrates a point. So there are changes I did have to make to this to make it work, and one of which is there's a generate series uh, here where it's this number filter. In his implementation, this upper bound, he uses the actual filter to set that. But knowing that my values, at least in my data set, were not going to go over 100%. It's kind of a bit of a cheat, and that's why I want people to look at this and say, "Hi, how can we improve on this?" In case that does need to be a little bit more fluid. So, I'm gonna just set up a new sheet up to the point of where I'm able to slice on a single measure, and then show my process of how I was able to kind of tinker with it and get it to slice on the different measures. All right, so at this point, we followed Parker's tutorial on how to create the measure slicer, this guy right here. And at this point, we're at that juncture where we got our report set up. And again, I'm not saying that this is a particularly good, storytelling experience here, but it was help for this demonstration. But things are working, right? You got your dynamic measures here, working. You can see change in that. So again, yeah, please watch the video on Parker's video. Also, I think Guy in a Cube has also a video on dynamic measures, but you can see that 5.48 for transactions for Minnesota, and when you switch to units, it's 7.28, and you can see this guy's also, this table down here is changing to reflect that. The month filters are also working. You can see that change from, and so as the region filter, and those are all working, including the date filter, right? And even the measure slicer is working, right? We can see it. Yeah, taking out some values, you can go down to a minimum of 1, and you can go there up to 1, the maximum. However, the problem lies is when you switch over to units, right? The upper lower bound did not change, and in this case, you can see that the upper bound here is 7.41, and the lower bound being 6.57. You can, when you scroll here, nothing is changing as far as the map and the table, right? And then as soon as you go this side, all of a sudden everything disappears. And I know some of you can already understand what's going on. Revenue, you're like, okay, maybe test units that's messed up, and so you go to revenue and like, okay, hey, it seems to be working. But as soon as you go down to the lower limit, 5.17, you got this Georgia sticking out at 4.95, and then if you go out there to the upper limit, 5.93, everything gets excluded. And I'll explain what's going on there. So when we set up the selected measure, right, or the selected metric, what we're looking at is that this table reports, which has these values here, just a table of three rows, the transactions units revenue and the ID 1, 2, and 3. And so the selected value picks the currently selected value, and if nothing is selected, it defaults to 1, right? And so and the other piece of this that's kind of contributing to that is that the slicer filter, which drives this right here, if you look at how that's set up, right, it's basically creating this table, a virtual table, and it's got a state name, the selected metric, and then it gets a min and a max value from this table, right, of states and selected metrics. So now, being that our selected metric is going to be set to 1, all it's seeing is this transactions, under the transaction context, right? And that's why it's not changing, right? When we move around, right, it's not changing this particular value here. So what I had to do, the way I thought about this was this. So I created a virtual table here, and again, as I stated before, I'm not an expert in DAX. Alberto and Marco from SQL BI will probably look at this and scream at the heads off. If they have a look at it, that's what I'm saying. It's not elegant, but I just created this table, and I don't know whether whether it's summarize columns or summarize, whichever is more efficient right now. Just using summarize columns, and I created. Actually, let's just look at it. Right, it's this table right here. It creates the selected the metric value, and then the various values associated with that metric. And since it's defaulting to 1, right, this table is only seeing 1, and then so this selected metric will match the transaction rate, because that's number 1, right? So 536 will match this 536, 573. But I was thinking to myself, okay, Victor, if we created this table, right, and let's see and if it's been created on the fly, let's look at this. If you take the selected metric, in this case it should be 1, right? It's the number 1, which is transaction. Selected value would be 5.53. I need to grab a min and a max from this table, and that's what I did, right? I did a min rate, which basically gets a selected metric, and if it's 1, get me the minimum value on the transaction column. If it's 2, the rates column, and I have a max value that does the same thing. So I include the min rate, and let's put that as a rate, and then max include that there, and include that as a rate too. Give that to a rate. So that's what that was my thought process, right? Create this table, and if you switch it up, right? If it's been created on the fly, this number should change. What happened to my mean rate? Looks like I changed it back. So yeah, this is 5.16, which is a minimum. I mean, it's saying 5.17 just because of that number table. This the number filter table. This value, if we add another 0, then that would give it a bit more precision. But that's what it's basically doing. It's pulling that number, and again here, when it's using units, it's going from 6.57 to 7.41. And so I created a different for the slicer filter that drives this guy. I updated it so that it could look at that table and give us the values, the minimum and the maximum values from there. And so what I did is I updated with this, and you can see I actually had to comment out that I'd been playing around with this. I had put in it, but it was giving me way too many weird values. And I don't even know whether I need this two guys yet, but maybe I do. In any case, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I create this selected metric, and then I min and the max rate, right? And then I mean, what I actually do here is I get, instead of previously, before it was the min and the max rate are coming from that table, right? This virtual table. But now, what I'm doing here is now I'm just pulling that min and max rate from the actual virtual table I pulled in, that I created, that's got all the different values, right? Let's go back here. So we can see that it's calling to that virtual table and getting that. And so that's how I updated the slicer piece of it, right? That's what drives this interaction here. And now, okay, nothing's happening. And this is another thing that Parker mentions is you have to do is you have to make sure that you wire up your various what are they called? Slicers to each other, right? So once I do that, I hook it up to that one, and now it's changing, right? And so 6.58 to 7.41, 4.96 to 5.81, and so and then I was like, oh great, let's actually give it a run here, and it's doing its thing. It's actually working, and I was super excited at this point, right? And then I'm like, all right, let me see, this 5.17, 5.93. Let's see what it is in the New England. I'm like, oh, that's curious. Is that? I mean, it could be that these two guys do actually are in this data set here, but again, make sure you hook up, right? And you can see now 5.25, and then I'm like, okay, and the same thing for February, right? And then if you hook it up, you can see. So you make sure you just wire up all these guys, and that's how I went about solving this particular problem with a dynamic measure and a measure filter. All right, what I wanted to cover next is how we can improve on this solution. And for most people at this point, they're like, hey, it's working, I'm good to go, I don't need to see anymore. But for those of you who want to stick around, maybe you can have you can get some ideas on how we can make this a little bit more efficient. And one of the places I wanted to start off was with the number filter. This is what dictates the range of, in my case, percents, right, from 0% to 100%. And in most cases this will work, but there are obviously many cases where it will not work, where there'll be data sets that will have negative percentages and over 100. So and if you watch Parker's video, he says that this when you change this increment, it does affect the number of rows, and so that could also impact the size and performance, and those are considerations you want to think about. But for my particular data set, it wasn't a big that didn't add too much to the size. But the problem is just trying to make it more dynamic, so hard coding it. And my thought was like, hey, I already got a min and a max. Why don't I just use that, right? So I'm going to do the min rate, and I'm going to just do the max rate, right? And I looked at that as an option, and it went, goes 5.5, 5.16 to 5.93. But it doesn't work, and you can see it already here. Georgia is already showing up in units. It's because again, we've talked about this, is that it's only seeing that context in regards to transactions, right? And so it's not going to see anything more than that 5.16 to that 5.94. And so I came up with a different solution, and so I'm hoping people can maybe look at this and say, hey, okay, that's a start, but it's not quite there yet. What I did is I created a series min and a series max, and how I did that was to the series min, I created a new virtual table, and I union the various columns, the trans rate, union rate, and revenue rate, and then I got the minimum value from this range. And it keeps the first column you use. That's why we're using trans rate here. And so that's the minimum. Then you do the max x, and you get the maximum, right? And actually, you also created another measure here for the increment, which I just, again, now you can also, right now I'm just hard coding it here, but some of you people can think about creative ways of making this more dynamic. And so using this two guys, I'm thinking, okay, that way we can have something like this for the generate series, because now this 4.95 to the 7.41 is the actual range of all my values. And if I go back to my number filter here, I already got this here. And so what I'm just doing is I'm taking the series min, which is the 4.95, and subtracting the increment counter, and I'm adding the increment counter to the maximum, so you can have all the ranges plus a little bit of leeway, and then obviously the increment is right there. And so what this does, the number filter, now if you go and check out the table, remember it was starting at 5.16, now it's going from 4.94 to the upper bound of 7.42. And go back to the map here, it is working. Units, everything seems to be working fine. The only concern I have about this is obviously if you got many columns and now you have to create this series, this min and max series from several columns, and that's gonna add some more processing. It's gonna impact some performance. And so that I'm wondering, there's probably somewhere someone can do this in just a simple DAX statement, and I'm not that person. So that's why I'm hoping that somebody can look at this and say, hey, this is probably a more elegant way of doing it. And the other piece which I wanted to discuss is there's this it's not a virtual table really. It's this table which I was using, which came from the original process that Parker showed us, and I just created this actual table which has the metric, the value, and the various columns. And this is okay again for my data set because it's small, but when you start looking at a data set which are in the millions of rows, then that's definitely going to be an impact there. So if somebody could maybe figure out a way of how we can do this without having to create this new table, then that might be definitely a way of improving this product, and so that it's more, it can scale better, it's more generalizable, and it will just end up giving a better experience, and not impacting performance. So no, and I'm just going to leave it at that, right? I'm sure there are other areas people have spotted along the way, and if you do have comments, please provide some insight. Again, I'm not a creator by any means. I know I'll be able to probably add this Power BI file to the YouTube video here. But if you found any value from this, like I said, I'm not a creator, but hey, a thumbs up would be great, just to say, hey, your time was well spent. I actually got some ideas from this. I'm able to actually solve a problem that I was having by watching your video. Just saying, hey, it's an interesting way of looking at things. So Again, thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope this did add some value to your work.